Hey folks, this is Mr. Michelson. As you know, I'm gone today. You should have just watched a BrainPop video about Mark Twain. And here's another picture of him. This is a colorized picture of him to give you a better sense of this guy and what he looked like. They didn't even have color photography back then, but we've gone in and made it colorized for you so you can get a real life picture of what this guy looked like in his later years. And we'll learn a little bit more about Mark Twain here because he's the author of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which is our next unit. It's the next book that we'll be reading. So a couple of fast facts about Mark Twain. He grew up in a town called Hannibal, Missouri, and that's important for us because he based a lot of the setting of this novel on that town of Hannibal, Missouri. We'll talk more about that in a bit. He was from a wealthy family, but he was sent to work at the age of 12 after his father died, sadly. And so he was a working boy, a working man. He had a lot of jobs throughout his life, not just being an author. He worked on a steamship, pretty importantly, and he traveled the Mississippi at a pretty interesting time to be doing that. He saw America really growing up and a lot of industry happening there on the river. But he wrote about this and used these experiences for his novels and his other writings. Here's where Hannibal would be on the map. You can see St. Louis down to the south on the Mississippi if you've ever gone there. And the Iowa border's up here. So Minnesota's just, north of Iowa here. He's not too far from where we are in Minnesota. This is a Midwestern novel, and you'll see some of that, I think. Twain is not his real name. His real name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens. And of course, I would want my name to be changed if that was my name too, I think. He got his pen name Mark Twain from working on that steamship. Mark Twain is the measure of depth in a steamboat navigation. 2 fathoms or 12 feet is deep enough for a steamboat to pass safely. And the Mississippi was a pretty wild river back then, much wilder than it is today. So knowing how deep the river was really crucial to navigating it and to getting from one place to another on the river. So that's where he got his name. Kind of fun fact for you. Here's a couple pictures of some steamships. So you can get an idea of maybe what our setting will look like. Some beautiful bluffs in the background here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the characters, just preview the characters. All these characters in the novel are based on people that Twain actually knew growing up. So he wrote about what he knew and based his characters on real life people. Our main character, Tom Sawyer, is a good-hearted boy, but he gets into a lot of trouble. And Tom Sawyer is really based on 3 boys that Twain knew. He kind of combined some of his friends, some of people he knew, into this one character of Tom Sawyer. Joe Harper is, in the novel, Tom's best friend among all the respectable boys, and he was based on boys from Twain's childhood, just some of his friends from childhood. Huckleberry Finn is a pretty well-known name because he does have his own book that Twain wrote about him, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Probably an even more famous novel and more well-regarded novel, I think, than the novel we're about to read. But Huckleberry Finn makes a lot of appearances in this novel. He's a really main character. And he is a pariah. If you've done your vocab, you'll know that pariah means an outcast. And Tom's best friend is also what he is. He is not liked by the parents, but he's admired by the children, and especially Tom. And this character was based on Tom Blankenship, who was another one of Twain's childhood friends. One character in the novel is Aunt Polly, Tom's aunt and guardian. She's very kind-hearted. We'll meet her in the very first chapter of this book, and he's based on Twain's mother in real life. Mary is a sweet cousin of Tom. She's good-hearted. She loves Tom, and he based that on his sister Pamela, that character. Sid is Tom's half-brother. He's what we might call a goody-goody, which means he likes to make it seem like he's the perfect boy, but he's actually kind of mean-hearted, and we'll see that even in our first chapter as well. He based this character on his younger brother, of course, Henry. And Injun Joe is a violent town villain in the novel. This word Injun is a word that's really a slur. It's not a word you want to be throwing around. It's very offensive, and it refers to Native American people, or what used to be called Indian people. And so this character is that's just what he's called, and he's a town villain. We won't meet him until later in the novel. I think chapter 9 is his first appearance. And Twain based this character on a real life person as well, just a harmless town drunk, someone that he knew as part of his life in Hannibal. So there's some real fast facts about some of these characters, and we'll be meeting these characters as we get into the book. We'll also be getting to know the town of St. Petersburg, which is the setting for our novel in the 1840s. So I know you've studied the Civil War in social studies. This is the time right before the Civil War, and so just kind of think about that and maybe what you learned and kind of put this in historical context. This is a fictional town, St. Petersburg, but it is based on the town of Hannibal, where Twain grew up. Small Missouri town on the Mississippi, and that's all I'll say about that for now. As such, being this is before the Civil War, before anything was done about the issue of slavery in this country, I'll just read this for you. It says, "In my boyhood days, I was not aware that there was anything wrong about it," meaning slavery. "The local papers said nothing against it. The local pulpit taught us God approved it," is what Mark Twain said. Still, he sensed that slavery was a woeful thing. Once he witnessed a dozen chained slaves waiting to be shipped down river, and he thinks those were the saddest faces he ever saw. So just know that that's where we are in our country's history. You will see kind of notions of slavery in the background of this novel. It's something we can certainly talk about and address, but I just figured I'd address that. So you know where we're at in history, and you know a little bit about what our country was like then. Of course, also in the 1840s, it was a very different time in a lot of other ways as well. TVs, of course, did not exist. Video games, mobile phones. You couldn't go to a Starbucks. Lots of different things. I mean, cars were not a thing. So you got to think about that and think about, what would you do in that situation? What kind of things would you do to entertain yourself? How would life be different if things were all stripped away, all our modern conveniences and technologies? And what would things be like? What would things be? How would they be different? That's kind of what we'll be looking at, and kind of putting ourselves in the feet of these boys, in the shoes of these boys, and some of the other characters as well. So I think that's about it. I'm going to just go through these real quick. Yeah, just some goals for the unit. This is a challenging text. We're going to try to practice some close reading skills. We've already started looking at some vocab words, and you'll have some time after I'm done talking to continue to work on that vocabulary thing that we assigned on Google Classroom. We also want to use context clues to find out other words and what they mean. And we'll see a lot of words that I think we'll be dealing with to challenge ourselves and to learn some new things, and to read a text that maybe isn't always going to make sense the first time that we read something. We can also try to relate and connect to this novel. Even though it is set in the 1840s and it is an old novel, we can try to relate it to our own lives. And we want to understand the culture of the United States. The past, the present is all important for understanding our country and its history. And we'll look at things especially like common superstitions and behaviors. And so with that, I'll stop talking at you, and we will get these books next class. Right now, you have time to work on that vocabulary stuff, or if you're done with that, you have some time to read. Have a great one. We'll see you.